Hi, I'm Sam Candy. Welcome to Sustain Talks. Today I'm joined by Tobi Elusakin. Tobi is a sustainability consultant with Mace, a STEM ambassador. He has a PhD in energy and sustainability and a master's degree in offshore and ocean technology with subsea engineering, and so much more. I am so excited to have you here today, Tobi. How are you?
I'm fine, thank you. Thank you so much for having me. I
Uh,
appreciate this.
Looking forward to it. So, look,
Yeah,
that
me too.
was a brief introduction, but I really want to hear about your journey. You've studied so much, and yeah, tell us more about you and how you got to what you're doing today.
Yeah, I've probably spent too much time in school. It's the way I think about it now. But I think I started in chemical engineering as my first degree. So I did chemical engineering, partly because I was told to. It just seemed like what I was supposed to do, either engineering or um, medicine or law. So I did chemical engineering, and I think my first introduction to the environment and sustainability in general was in my final year, where I had to focus on a part of chemical engineering, and what I focused on was environmental engineering. I did my thesis on my project, not say thesis. I did my project on noise pollution at the time. Yeah, and following that, I went into environmental consulting, where I worked a lot on noise pollution, air pollution, but primarily on environmental impact assessment for capital projects in Lagos, Nigeria. I worked for a company called Cares Group, which is still going strong today. The SME in Nigeria, one of the very few, I think, that are really fighting the good fight for the environment. Yeah, they did a good job there. And so I decided to come to the UK for my master's. I did offshore and ocean technology, as you mentioned, and I really looked to focus on the offshore environment, so offshore oil and gas, offshore wind, and it's kind of what I did. My master's. Afterwards, I got a scholarship for a PhD, which I decided to take up because, to be honest, I wasn't really sure what I wanted to do, and I just had this opportunity to still stay in the UK, and to continue doing something that I kind of liked. So to focus a little bit more on offshore energy systems. And I think it was during my PhD that things started coming into focus, So during my PhD, I started first of all on offshore oil and gas systems, and then moved to wind energy at a time where it seemed to be really the focus of that time. So this is 2018, 2019. Wind energy at the time had become quite popular. Over the decade, the levelized cost of energy had gone down significantly, for renewable energy in general, but also for wind energy. And the level of investment in offshore wind, especially, was starting to really creep up. There was also a focus on technology development for floating offshore wind. So it's another part of offshore wind energy. So floating offshore wind, to provide a better opportunity for energy production, as opposed to fixed bottom offshore wind or wind energy in general. So there was quite a bit of opportunity for research, development, investment in offshore wind, and so I decided to really focus on that and go into that. And I finished my PhD. I got a job as a researcher in a research consultancy. Um, and I actually wasn't doing anything in offshore wind, really. I kind of liked what I was doing, and I liked it primarily because it gave me an opportunity to do something on the other end of the energy value chain. So as opposed to energy production, I was looking at energy demand. And here I worked in a company called Trilateral Research. Here I worked on energy efficiency in EU building stock. And it was still research, but what we looked at was basically looking at the socioeconomic effects of energy efficiency based renovations on EU buildings, and seeing how those wider benefits of energy efficiency can be really highlighted and used as a basis for investments. And I think that really then set my focus primarily on corporate sustainability. So I decided to focus on the built environment, since I'd already started doing some research on that, and then I moved to Mace, where I am now. Mace is a large contractor. And they're pretty big in the built environment, and so there's like so many opportunities for sustainability in buildings and the built environment in general. And that's how I got to where I am today. Yeah.
What great opportunity, and to take your experience into, you know, from energy and buildings, and is probably one of the biggest challenges for companies today is how they can reduce their energy with what's going on in the world at the moment. It's you couldn't be in a better position to help businesses. But before we get into that a little bit further, and obviously want to hear more about the offshore wind, and I have many conversations about that and, you know, what it actually means. So I'd really like to delve deeper into your knowledge and your research and expertise. But tell me a little bit about your view of sustainability and climate change and where we are today from your experience and studies.
So yeah, I would say I used to have this tunnel vision of what sustainability was. It was primarily tailored to what I was always doing at the time. You know, so when I was working as an environmental consultant in Nigeria, I only viewed sustainability from the lens of what we did, which primarily was just environmental impact assessments for a lot of large scale marine based projects. So either pipeline laying or developing a key wall, or things of that nature. And so I focused on sustainability primarily in the lens of what I was doing at the time. But then since working as a consultant within the built environment, I think my point of view has changed quite a bit. I've just kind of gotten a more holistic understanding of what sustainability is. It's not necessarily just looking at reducing emissions. You know, it's more than that. It's looking at waste management, freshwater use, health and well-being, sustainable farming, and a number of other things. Biodiversity is a big part of sustainability, and you know, having that holistic point of view for me is quite important when it comes to what sustainability really means. The dictionary official definition seems to be, you know, making sure that we're able to continue to develop without affecting the use, affecting the planet essentially for future use. But then I would you know, take a more a broader approach. I would say a broader definition to sustainability to include all these different themes. So looking at, like I mentioned, waste management, health and well-being, carbon emission reduction, at sustainable farming, you know, at freshwater use and things like that. So having a more holistic point of view, I think, to sustainability is very important.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. And we've spoken before about, you know, you can't be a business that's talking about sustainability if you're not talking about the social responsibility side as well. And I think that you know, that holistic approach is the way that every single business should be looking at when they're looking at their sustainability. And that's where sort of the E and the S comes into the
Yeah,
absolutely.
I absolutely agree. And that actually brings me to something else that I started to really look into during my time in research, and I've become quite passionate about, which is the just transition. So we want to, you know, transition to a net zero society or to a more sustainable society. But, you know, in many instances, there are parts of the world economy or parts of the world essentially that are being left behind, or that are being primarily used and not being compensated in the right way, you know, in terms of moving to this more sustainable economy or more sustainable planet. And it's important for everybody to be, you know, taken along, and which is essentially the tenet of the just transition. So making sure that everyone is able to have a fair chance, you know, in moving towards a more sustainable environment, if you will. So like you mentioned, that social side of things is extremely important, and it's not just about the environment. So yeah. You're absolutely right.
I think companies like Mace actually, certainly in construction, are very supportive of the communities that they work in, and that
Yes.
social side is a real key part of your business. I know from speaking to other construction businesses that, you know, when it comes to that, supporting communities when you're building, and that's really very much a decision that is made in looking at who you employ from the areas that you work in, and the diversity and inclusion, and the mental health and well-being of the people that are working on the project. So yeah, I know that that's a key part. And you obviously have a lot of experience and have studied energy. I obviously we're in such a big energy crisis right now. What are your, you know, it's hard for you to, you know, can you fix it? What do you think the answers are like?
Yeah, that's a really good question. Not that anyone is listening to my opinion, you know.
Oh yeah.
But yeah, except from you. Yes, thank you, Sam. Thank you. So the energy crisis is such a hot topic at the moment, and rightly so. Energy is essentially life. You know, the world we live in today is so dependent on our energy. The standard of living that we have, you know, having actual like electricity, you know, for us to see, to plug our devices, our electronics, digital. The focus on digital now is so immense, and so energy is central to all of that. And it's understandable that when there's a bit of a threat to that, it becomes such an issue as we've got it now. Um, in a crisis, I think people look to their leaders to provide solutions at that time when they need it. And you know, this crisis is showing that, you know, we're not. It doesn't seem like we're as far along in the clean energy revolution as we would want to be. You know, even though the UK is a world leader, not just in Europe, but a world leader in um, wind energy, offshore wind energy, especially. I think we have the second highest installed capacity in the world behind China. So the UK is a large world leader in terms of wind energy. It still doesn't help much, you know, given that a lot of the installed capacity is not yet connected to the grid. And there's the issue of just availability in terms of the base load for these energy supply sources, so wind and solar. There's the main primary issue with those is, you know, when the wind isn't blowing and the sun isn't shining, you know, what sources of energy are we using? You know, are we still able to use that? And the storage side of things for wind and solar isn't as developed as we would like, and so those things are not reliable enough. So that when something like this, where there's a cost of living crisis or like inflation issue at the moment, where, you know, energy prices are so high, and then there is the unfortunate Russian invasion of Ukraine that's, you know, putting another shock on natural gas prices. In a position where we're basically supposed to be self-reliant, especially on the amount of renewable energy that we've managed to develop. We're not in that position because, you know, the renewable energy that we managed to get isn't able to supply the base demand that is needed, you know, to power all the homes and businesses within the UK. In terms of a solution, to be honest, I'm not really sure. I think the biggest challenge now is expectation management, because on the one side you've got the clean energy skeptics who are, you know, just talking about how, you know, how now it's obvious now that, you know, clean energy doesn't seem to make sense, and, you know, the investment in clean energy was always a pipe dream and all that. And then you've got the climate revolutionaries who are, you know, mentioning how, you know, if we had focused a lot more on clean energy right from the get-go, we'd probably be farther along now and we wouldn't be in this situation. And, you know, the challenge then becomes, I think, expectation management, and, you know, trying to marry those two sides, you know, because just realistically, it just wouldn't be possible for one of those two sides to be the primary focus, especially for governments, given that, you know, they actually have to govern both sides of this divide, So I think the primary thing would be educating people to help them understand what actually is the cause of this crisis, and also expectation management in terms of what we can expect to achieve in terms of clean energy, maybe over the next decade, and juxtaposing that with how much we want to affect our current standard of living. Because if we want to continue to pay low prices for energy, it's going to be difficult to do that with the issues that we have currently with wind and solar. And so, solutions like nuclear energy, which seems to be becoming more popular now. Solutions like nuclear energy, which is low emissions, is safe, and it's quite reliable. It seems to be quite popular at the moment. And I would say the first step would be trying to slow down the shutdowns of our existing nuclear reactors, and seeing if it would be possible to ramp up development of a few more, just to make sure that there is some stability, and upon that stability, we can then build the wind and solar, build the storage capacity of storage development for those energy sources, to make sure that we're able to use that when wind isn't blowing, sun isn't shining.
Yeah. I think there's so many challenges, but for businesses that need to, they need to reduce their energy. They have targets to get to net zero. They need to switch to renewables to be able to do that as well. Let's talk a little bit about net zero, because I made a comment the other week. I posted about how we talk about getting to net zero by 2050, but you might not have the CEO in the company in 5 years' time. So, setting long-term goals companies aren't going to keep to them. I mean, you probably seen the government have been taken to court for their net zero claims, and that they've not they've not been founded. They are achievable targets, and I think it's really important that we set measurable targets and scientific targets, science-based targets. But what's the point of setting these targets if they're not reachable and they don't stand up to time? So what are your views on net zero?
For me, I'm more of a glass half full person, and I kind of live by the saying: if you reach for the stars, if you fall, you land on the clouds. That's kind of the idea.
I love
that. So you set stretch targets, not necessarily because you can achieve them, but because the attempt of achieving them definitely does yield progress. And for me, that's it. People like to clown the environmentalists, people who really push for the betterment of the environment, people who actually go out and protest. People like to clown these people, and I don't, because I feel like the needle somehow has to be moved forward, however much, even if it's an inch. The needle has to be moved forward, and understandably, sometimes the protests get in the way of people doing their day jobs, people living their lives. But then, if these people aren't screaming from the rooftops, if they aren't shouting about this, then no one is going to be talking about it, and we wouldn't see debates on it in the House of Parliament. We wouldn't see MPs talking about it. We wouldn't see policy being developed. Even though it happens slowly, it still happens, and for me, that's the view that I take in terms of the net zero targets. We might not reach net zero by 2050. It is very possible. We might not keep temperature increase to 1.5 degrees centigrade or Celsius rather by then, but at least we're attempting to do that, and in attempting to do that, we're leaving the planet in a better place than we have it now, even if we don't get to that point, or even if we don't get to that target. That's my own take on it.
That's a really interesting take on it, and I have to say I've never heard somebody's take on it like that, and I think it's to say, well, if you have a goal like that and you get to there, it's better than having a goal like that and only getting to there. So
yeah.
I see that. I think my worry is that people are setting the goals and then not putting the action in soon enough to even do the goals are so far away that we'll worry about it at a later stage and not focusing on what they really need to do in the next 3-4 years.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. And I think a solution to that, or something we can do about that essentially is maybe setting more short-term targets. We have this target that seems to be a long ways away. 2050, I will be in my 60s. And so it just seems like it's so far away, and why bother? But then I think it's important for organizations like United Nations, Science-Based Target Institute, and a lot of these respected organizations that come out with these targets and advice on how to reach these targets. If they're able to also come out with more short-term targets as well for organizations, businesses, countries, cities, if they're able to come out with targets in the short term as well as the long term, just so that governments who are in power now, or C-suite executives who currently hold the reins of power within organizations, so that they have something that they're actually looking to achieve, within the context of their own tenure, and not something where where they're basically saying, all right, I'm just gonna sit and wait, and whoever's going to come in next is going to worry about this 2050 target. So in that case, for me, I would call on these institutions to help set these short-term targets. And it's not just them. For example, Mace, it has its own short-term-ish targets. We have 2026 targets to save 1 million tons of client carbon by 2026. Yeah, so we have this really large corporate targets, and I think and I think it's important, especially for companies, to set those targets and craft and build the entire operations around achieving those targets as well,
especially with their clients, because that comes under scope 3, right?
Yes, it does.
Yeah.
It does.
So they can help support their clients to do that.
Yes, that's the idea. That's the idea. So not just scope 1 and scope 2. In terms of scopes 1 and 2, we have a target to achieve 10% carbon reduction year on year for our Mace operations. So 10% every year, achieving carbon reduction for Mace operations, and then we have the 1 million tons of client carbon saved by 2026. In addition to that, we have a target, I think, to achieve 500 hectares of biodiversity net gain by 2026 as well. So these are targets that organizations can set and then build their operations around to be able to achieve those. So it's partly for governments and for organizations to set some of those short-term targets as well.
Yeah, so part of your role then, when you're working with your clients, is you're helping them find solutions.
Absolutely.
Yeah, that's really good to hear. Really,
absolutely. Yeah, it's built into our operations, built into everything we do, into incentive schemes. So yeah, and I think as much as it's if it is being really hammered into the operations, everyday operations, and working with clients, I think everyone within that organization will be able to internalize it, take it on as a target, as a personal target, and help the overall company achieve its goals. Yeah,
that's interesting to hear as well, because I think a lot of the challenges that companies face when they are looking at being more sustainable is how they communicate and engage with their employees so that everyone has the same message. So is that, I'm interested to hear a bit further, is that done through do they talk to you daily and send you articles, and how does that work?
Absolutely, yeah. So it's like a drum that's being beaten every day. So we have specific corporate targets. So in terms of the environmental side of things, a target is to pursue a sustainable world. And pursuing a sustainable world involves, looking at reducing our own carbon emissions, saving client carbon, 1 million tons, client carbon saved, biodiversity net gain increase as well in all of our projects. So we aim to achieve a biodiversity net gain of 10%, with all of our projects. And this is something that's plastered into every single bid that we submit, every project that we do, and we do these things called masterclasses pretty much every week. Pursue a sustainable world masterclass, and so I'm part of the responsible business team. That's the sustainability team within the company. But the company is about 7,000 or 8,000 strong, and so not everyone is in a position to really interface with sustainability as much as I am. And so, these master classes are there for everyone within the organization really to understand what we mean by trying to save 1 million tons of carbon for clients by 2026. And given we're a construction company, it's a stretch target, is a really big target, but there's ample opportunity to do that. Given the importance of the built environment essentially to carbon emissions.
So do you have outside speakers come in, or is it like really people from within that are sharing their expertise from their findings and research?
So it's primarily people from within. I don't gather that we've had many outside people come speak with us, particularly because our sustainability team is about 150 people strong, and so there's a lot of people, a lot of expertise. Yeah, so there are a lot of people who know their stuff and who can talk about different topics. So we have people talk about biodiversity, carbon emissions, embodied carbon, social value, solar energy, renewable energy in general. There's several things, retrofits. So there's several different things that we as a contractor and as consultants can use to save client carbon. And given the knowledge that we have in the team, we basically use that to try to educate the entire company in how to achieve that goal.
That sounds so good, especially when you think, like, also within business at the moment, companies are struggling to keep their employees and retention and attract new employees. Actually, to have that education and constant learning is the reason that you would want to stay in a company, because you're just going to keep learning all the time, right?
Yeah. And I think just understanding that your company has such a commitment to this sustainability based goals, this is not just increasing our profits. Like as long as I've been there, and I've been at Mace for 5 months, I don't think I've heard us really talk about the goal of increasing our profits or revenue as much as I've heard us trying to achieve saving 1 million tons of client carbon. So that's another thing. If that your organization is genuinely committed to improving the environment, especially given the large footprint that our kind of work has on the environment, working in the built environment. It's quite inspiring, and it does get one to buy into that vision, if you will. And for me, I have kind of, yeah.
Yeah, that's really good to hear. And I know you're early on in your career with them, but I think that it sounds like it's a great company to work for. And I'm so glad that I had the opportunity, when we met and started having a discussion. And I wanted to do, I like to do my podcast with lots of different people from different experiences in life, and but we're almost at the end. I've got a couple more questions that I really want to ask you, and that is like, to be more sustainable, and from your experience and your knowledge and the consulting that you're doing, what do you think that we all need to stop doing?
In terms of what we need to stop doing, I think we need to, this might sound a little bit philosophical, but I think we might need to stop antagonizing each other. I think there's this tendency to criticize people who probably don't understand, or who don't have as much knowledge on sustainability as some people might have. And so helping to educate people, help people understand what sustainability really means, and how, within your context you can actually be more sustainable, I think is quite important. On a practical basis, what we need to stop doing individually, I would say, is to stop consuming as much energy as we currently are. A lot of people don't really, like, the only reason why people seem to have focused on energy use and energy consumption now is because it's really expensive. Energy use has been cheapish for quite a long time now. And now that it's expensive, people are looking at ways to save energy. But this is something that we should be doing anyway. So to essentially stop using as much energy as we are, to stop, if I can say, stop flying as much, stop. It's hard to find find ways for people to stop doing certain things, but it's easier to maybe say people should start doing other things. So instead of driving somewhere, and I'm trying to look at individual effects now, as opposed to more corporate ideals. So instead of driving somewhere, look at more sustainable ways of transport. You can cycle, using trains. A lot more trains are a lot more sustainable than driving. And then in terms of energy use as well, energy efficiency is, the way the EU has put it, is the first step towards reducing energy use, and the first step towards really reducing carbon emissions at any level. Just improving the efficiency of in terms of how we use energy, how much output we get from 1 joule of energy that we use. Energy efficiency is the first step, I think, especially within the home. We spend so much time at home, at least nowadays, and finding ways to be more energy efficient helps to reduce carbon emissions from our homes and our buildings. Buildings emit, I think it's about 35% of emissions within the UK, and that's commercial and residential buildings. On a commercial sense as well, looking at how to be more energy efficient, getting more energy efficient appliances, renovating our spaces to become more efficient, adding insulation to walls, roofs, improving windows, just to ensure that we don't use as much heating to heat our homes. So these are seemingly little things that we can do that conserve quite a bit of energy, and by so doing help to become more sustainable. But then it goes beyond that as well. So there's something I'm working on now, and that's a waste management project. And in working on this, it's helped me to really understand the effects of waste, essentially, and how much waste we emit as a species. So ensuring that waste is managed properly, so not just diverted to landfill, not just sent to landfill, but ensuring that as much as can be recycled is recycled. But then before you even get to that point, to reduce the amount of waste that you generate, first of all, because actually transporting the waste and then dealing with the waste does release its own emissions. And so if we're able to reduce our waste, that helps as well. And then what else? Yeah, to become more sustainable, like you mentioned previously, there's a social aspect of it as well. So ensuring that socially we're able to contribute to the health and well-being of people around us, making sure our communities are better off for us being in them than without. I think for me, that's how I would say we can be more sustainable. We can go on, but in a nutshell, that's really it.
That's really, really, honestly, that's so insightful. I'm sure people are going to get takeaways from that. I think we're more aware of the energy that we use than we have ever been in our lifetimes. I recently got an electric meter. I'm obsessed with it. With the lights I turn on, I turn them off all the time. With every single electrical appliance, I have no plugs on. My usage is now at 0.01p per hour.
Yeah.
So I've really managed to get it down, and I'm proud of that. But thank you for
Yeah.
your time. This has been so good. I'm really glad we have the opportunity to talk, and there's been so many takeaways from it, and I look forward to speaking to you again. Thank you for your time. Thank you for your insight, and
thank you so much. Yeah, thank you so much, Sam. I really appreciate the opportunity to be here and talk with you. It's an honor, really, given your stature within sustainability. Yeah, it is genuinely an honor. So thank you.
Seeing your journey grow. So thanks, Tobi.
Yeah,
Have a good day.
Thank you so much. You too. You too.